Hey, I just wanted to highlight a few sentences and ideas that are in the chapter that I thought were helpful. The first is the opening line. I think it's great. Have you ever stood in front of a piece of modern art and wondered what on earth it's all about? Yes. Every time I think I've stood in front of a piece of modern art. I try not to do it too often for the sake of my sanity, but it's great. And I like the picture that if we had somebody standing next to us, the painter, the artist, saying, "Hey, this is what it means. You know, this is what it's about." That would be helpful, although wouldn't make it any more enjoyable, I don't think. Towards the bottom of page 63, he says this: "But there are times when we have similar feelings when reading parts of the Bible. I'm particularly thinking of narrative passages. We read about people being born, people dying, people becoming kings or slaves, people traveling from one place to another. The events themselves are reasonably straightforward and easy to understand. Then there's that key question: what does it mean?" And so again, we need to, this is similar to the author's purpose, we need to be moving from the what to the why. It's one thing just to be able to read in front of us what's there, but we have to try to grasp the why. So the first text that they bring us to is Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 to 15. And this is something possibly, as far as in class, we could either read or have on a piece of paper the text without the author's comment or the narrator's comment, and read through it and what's happening, what's the deal, okay? And then introduce, maybe on another piece of paper or on the back side of the paper or however you'd want to do it, the verse containing the narrator's comment, and then just provoke some discussion without the comment, and then bring some discussion with the comment. Just an idea. Don't know if it'll work or not. It might totally flop and people will think you're not a good teacher, but that's okay. So Matthew 2, "Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, and said, 'Rise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt. Remain there until I tell you. For Herod's about to search for the child to destroy him.' And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod." Now the narrator's comment comes in here. "This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, 'Out of Egypt I called my son.'" And then the next sentence that the author writes is key. The last sentence does not tell us anything further about what has happened, but about the events themselves. Rather, it gives us Matthew's explanation of the events. And so that's helpful. Narrator's comment doesn't move the narrative forward necessarily, but it just gives us further understanding of what's already been presented, or what we've already read about. And then they go on to explain that this fulfills the promise of the Old Testament, that Jesus would come out of Egypt, just as Israel had done during the Exodus. And so we see Jesus here as the perfect Israel. You know, Jesus stands as the one who perfectly worships and obeys as Israel was intended to do. And so just as Israel came out of Egypt, so God brought his son out of Egypt. And he brought Dawn and I out of Egypt. So then we also have the Genesis 25 text with Esau, with the clause at the end, "Thus Esau despised his birthright." This is the narrator's comment. And so it shows us that he really just didn't care about the gift that his birthright was. He was willing just to sell it and get rid of it. He was hungry. His birthright meant so little. He was ready to swap it for a bowl of soup. This kind of shows his character, and so we don't need to be sympathetic toward Esau. The example of John chapter 2 is a good one. I like reading John 2, 18 to 22 and taking out that sentence, "But he was speaking about the temple of his body." This would be a good one to use, that teaching method of having the text without, just having it on a piece of paper and looking at it and thinking, okay, what does this mean? Just don't let people go to what they have heard before and what they know the text to say as they have heard it in the past. But have them focus on, all right, what does the text mean right in front of us without that sentence in there? And it really doesn't help us, doesn't make any sense when you read it that way. And then bring it back into the text, and all of a sudden there is a tremendous amount of power in that text and significance for us. So that's just, I think, I'm teaching Dean's class this week. I think I'm going to do that, take it out and put it in. Well, let's just look simply at the Dig Deeper section on page 67. I'll give you the answers here. You know, the book of Judges is this great narrative where we see all of these scenes spanning many, many years, different people. And we think, well, what does it all mean? Well, they tell us to read Judges 17, 1 through 6. And this is the strange account of the man named Micah. He says something to his mom about the silver that she had, and he found it, and so she says, blessed are you. And verse 3, he restored the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother, and his mother said, I dedicate the silver to the Lord from my hand for my son, to make a carved image and a metal image. So she takes 200 pieces of silver from this money that he found, and he sends it to the blacksmith, melts it down, and makes an idol out of it. In verse 5, and the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and household gods, and ordained one of his sons, who became his priest. So strange, establishing idol worship, in a sense giving thanks to some false god for helping him find all of this silver. And so the question is, what if we just read that 1 through 5, what conclusions would you come to? Now we might think it's strange, but as far as a conclusion, it's standalone. We don't really know where it's going, although if we know our Bibles, we know that something is wrong here. But what's the purpose? What's happening? You look at verse 6, and we read, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So how does the author's comment in verse 6 help us understand what's going on? Well, we understand there's no spiritual leadership in the land. The purpose of the king, if you remember back in Deuteronomy, when the stipulations for what the king was supposed to be, I believe, was it Deuteronomy 18 or Deuteronomy 16 or maybe Deuteronomy 17? Let's take a look quickly. What was the king supposed to do? Each king, let's see, this is Deuteronomy 17 verse 14. When you come to the land the Lord your God's giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I'll set a king over me like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. So the king had to be an Israelite. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. And so that's pretty self-explanatory. Verse 17, he shall not acquire many wives. Again, pretty self-explanatory. And he shall not acquire for himself excessive silver or gold. And look what he's supposed to do. Verse 18, when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a copy, or in a book, a copy of this law approved by the priests. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it in all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes, and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. So the king was supposed to have a copy of the book of the law, so that he could lead Israel in righteousness. So the point of Judges here is that there was no king on the throne at this time, so there was no one to lead in righteousness, so that everyone was doing what was right in his own eyes. So now we look at the comment of Judges 17:6 is repeated throughout the book. You see these texts, 18:1, 19:1, 21:25. Excuse me, buddy. What is Israel's big need at this point in her history, and why? You come to the conclusion Israel needs a king at this point in time. Israel needs spiritual leadership. Israel needs to be shepherded in the ways that they are to walk after God. And the people have their own solution, but it's not the right one. Can you see why from Judges 8:22 to 23? When you look at Judges 8:22, then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian. Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you, and the Lord will rule over you. So Gideon had it right. He said, hey, God has to rule over you. In 1 Samuel chapter 8 then, 6 and 7, you flip that way. In 1 Samuel 8, 6 and 7, but the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge over us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. So the people did need a king, and the king was supposed to be God. At some point, God knew in his foreknowledge that they would reject him. So he said, when the king does come, this is how he is to lead. He is to be one who follows me and leads folks to follow me as well. Well, the last question here, what, or rather, who is God's solution? So we go to Acts chapter 13. And in Acts chapter 13, what we have here, oops, wrong one. We have kind of this historical, or this history lesson here. Paul is in Pisidian Antioch, and he is in on the Sabbath in the synagogue, so he's giving the history lesson. And he comes to verse 20, and it says, all this took about 450 years, and after that he gave them judges until Samuel the prophet. Then they asked for a king, and God gave them Saul the son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, for 40 years. And when he had removed him, he raised up David to be their king, of whom he testified and said, I found in David the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do all my will. Of this man's offspring God has brought to Israel a Savior, Jesus, as he promised. So who is God's solution? It's Christ. Who is to lead and rule over the people? It's Christ. Who is to lead the people and shepherd them in righteousness? It is Christ. Who is to be God's representative? It is Christ. And so we see that God would be their king over his people. And even when people rejected this, they rejected God, God's plan still went forth, and it was to establish his king, his righteous king, King Jesus, over his people to rule and to reign. And so we come back to Judges, and we understand this comment from the narrator that we see throughout the book of Judges. There was no king over them, and the people all did what was right in his own eyes. Makes us even see now that without King Jesus over our lives, we do whatever seems right to us. So that's Dig Deeper for this week. The narrator's comment, teach well, teach with passion, teach from firsthand experience. So get with God this week and then teach from the overflow of that. Appreciate you all, and we'll talk to you soon.